Hello again, folks. Graham, Juice, and Matthews here, back with another edition of WrestleRant here today, talking all about Backlash from 1999 to 2008. 2009 review is already up here from last year. But I've had a lot of fun watching these pay-per-views for the entire month of April. From here, we're moving into Extreme Rules, then Judgment Day, I think maybe some Payback, Money in the Bank, and to answer someone's questions, yes, I am reviewing SummerSlam for the entire summer, pretty much. I think either from June or July to August. I'm reviewing every installment of SummerSlam ever, much like I did with WrestleMania, so that's going to be a lot of fun too. But yeah, like I said, a lot of people on Twitter have been saying, they're going back to watching these Backlash pay-per-views after having listened to these reviews done by me, and kind of getting reacclimated with these pay-per-views and remembering how awesome they really were. And they absolutely freaking were. Backlash was a great show. Extreme Rules, not to say that it's not, it's also an awesome show, but Backlash every single year, 2005 was no exception, as you'll come to find out in just a couple minutes. It was a great freaking show. I love Backlash, but it's been a lot of fun watching all these events back, and like I said, 2005 was no different. So kicking off the show for the Intercontinental Championship, Shelton Benjamin defending against Chris Jericho. So these two had a lot of great chemistry, and actually I did kind of read up on the build-up. I don't normally do that. I don't read into the build-up or the aftermath at a lot of these pay-per-views. I just kind of watch the pay-per-views themselves. I don't do my research. I apologize. But I did actually I did read up on the go-home show for this show, not because I was watching this show, but because I was writing an article about something else, and the go-home show just so happened to take place in England or whatever. I wrote an article this past week for Bleacher Report talking about the top 10 best moments on Raw in England, and I think the go-home show for this show took place in England, or maybe afterwards, I can't remember exactly, but I think a couple weeks beforehand. That said, though, the build-up to this matchup, I digress. The build-up to this matchup was not very good. Both guys were baby faces. They were heavily leaning towards Chris Jericho for the most part. They weren't booing Shelton Benjamin, but, Chris Jericho being the awesome veteran that he was and still is, people were going to side with him. So it really wasn't that much of a surprise, but the point in putting Jericho in there with Benjamin was to put Benjamin over and continue to continue his ascent towards the top of the card, as he was, he had been reigning as Intercontinental Champion since, I think, October when he beat Jericho, and Jim Ross did a very good job of kind of driving that narrative, saying that Jericho had never beaten Shelton Benjamin. I don't think he ever did. I went back and looked at the win-loss records and stuff. In one-on-one competition, the only matches these two had were during Jericho's first run with the company. I don't think they ever faced off in Jericho's second run when he returned in 2007. So in the few matches they had on Raw and on pay-per-view, Shelton Benjamin won every single match. But still, I thought it was a really, really good match. I enjoyed it. From a wrestling standpoint, I thought it was great. Like I said, the story technically really wasn't there. It was kind of just to build up Shelton Benjamin. But as an opener, I thought it was awesome. The crowd was heavily interested in it. And like I said, they were very much behind Chris Jericho throughout. But both guys put up a good fight. Shelton Benjamin coming out victorious. Still the Intercontinental Champion, I believe, with a roll-up. And Jericho was acting frustrated afterwards. I think Todd Grisham, tried to get a word from Jericho after the matchup, but he refused, and I think that was kind of planting the seeds for his eventual heel turn only a couple weeks later. But yeah, I thought the match itself was great, and I thought it was an awesome opener to the show. So up next are the World Tag Team titles, our second title match in a row here. It was a tag team turmoil matchup. So the teams involved were Tajiri and Regal, who were the then champions, the Heartthrobs, La Resistance, Simon Dean and Maven, and then Rosie and the Hurricane. So the way it all went down was Tajiri and Regal started it out. They beat the Heartthrobs, both of whom I interviewed, cheap plug. I think one of them's here on the channel with Antonio the Promise Thomas, and Romeo Roselli is from the January 5th edition of WrestleRant Radio, so if you guys want to go check those out, they talk all about the Heartthrobs tag team. They're both great guys, so you can check out those interviews. Just wanted to toss that in there. But yeah, they were in there for a little while, and then they beat them. They beat the Heartthrobs. In comes Simon Dean and Maven. Quickly beats them. Out comes La Resistance, cheating to beat Tajiri and Regal, basically essentially guaranteeing new World Tag Team Champions. And then out come Rosie and the Hurricane, who beat La Resistance to win their first and only World Tag Team titles. So the match itself, I didn't think was, tag team turmoil matches aren't really necessarily my forte. They're not bad. It just kind of, to me, it's just kind of the ultimate sign of laziness. They just kind of throw 5 tag teams together and say, hey, go out there and defend your titles. just kind of make something of it. I don't know what the state of tag team wrestling on Raw anyway was at this time, but I mean, why not just do Tajiri and Regal versus La Resistance? Maybe they wanted to find a way to put the titles on Rosie and Hurricane without having them beat the champions in a 2-on-2 match. I'm not really sure. But the match itself, though, like I said, was not bad. It was not bad whatsoever. I thought it was a decent match, not just too exciting. It was only about 14, 15 minutes long, got decent time. But when you have tag teams in there that no one gives two shits about, like the Heartthrobs, like I said, a very good tag team in terms of from an in-ring standpoint, but they had the whole Robbie E, Jersey Shore gimmick, even in 2005, before the show became popular, before the show was even around. And Simon Dean and Maven, who were a random-ass tag team. I don't even know why they were in there. Maven I like. He had a great theme song. Simon Dean was just... I forgot he was even on Raw. I remember he was on SmackDown. And I don't know if this was before or after a SmackDown run. I have no fucking idea. But, so they got eliminated quickly. La Resistance, but I don't know I can't remember exactly if they broke up and then they got back together. I can't remember because I know... Wasn't Rob Conway in there at one point? Or Rob Conway was in this match of Sylvain Grenier. And wasn't Rene Dupree a part of the La Resistance at one point too? Maybe the year prior. And then I know he went over to SmackDown. So I don't know. Maybe they reformed the stable without him. I'm not really sure exactly what the timeline of that was. But the matches towards the end, though, the matches towards the end were pretty good. I thought La Resistance had a pretty good match with Tajiri and Regal. They were protected in defeat, having to go through, starting out in the matchup, beating two other tag teams before ultimately falling to La Resistance, who cheated to win, and then Rosie and Hurricane kind of getting a nice little bonus tag team title run. I think they had been together since late 03, I want to say, or maybe 04. I think since late 03. So they were due for a tag team title run. An entertaining tag team. Silly, sure. But, the guys, Hurricane especially, Gregory Helms is a great athlete. Rosie, too, a part of the 3-minute warning back in the day, years before this. So they had a nice little run as World Tag Team Champions before they ultimately broke up. But it was a nice little win for them. The crowd was happy to see them win the tag team titles. So up next, a last man standing match between Edge and Chris Benoit, and what was probably my favorite match from the night, to be quite honest with you. Like I've said time and time before, I'm a sucker for a great story, and that's exactly what this matchup had. And it had the in-ring action too. That's why I loved it. That's why I said it was my favorite match in the card. Because from an in-ring standpoint, they went out there and just beat the living shit out of each other. But from a story standpoint, it made sense. Because not only, because they were kind of going off of WrestleMania, and Edge saying, with Edge screwing over Chris Benoit, it was Benoit who ascended the ladder only for Edge to hit his arm and him to fall off the ladder. Edge ascends the ladder and wins the Money in the Bank briefcase, the very first one at that, which was not on the line here. It was just a standard last man standing match. But not even further beyond that, these two were former World Tag Team Champions together. You go back a year before this, when Edge was the Intercontinental Champion and Benoit was the World Heavyweight Champion. These guys were on and off allies. They won the tag team titles together over the summer of 2004, and then going on to lose those tag team titles, with both these guys being a part of the Taboo Tuesday poll. I think it was Taboo Tuesday at that point. It didn't become Cyber Sunday until like 06, I think. And which I reviewed here on the channel, all these Cyber Sunday, Taboo Tuesday shows. If you want to go back and watch those here on the channel, G-plug. But yeah, Edge and Benoit were both involved in the poll to face the World Heavyweight Champion Triple H at Taboo Tuesday. Edge got pissed that the fans didn't vote for him, so he turned heel, and that's what kind of triggered this feud so many months earlier. So I love the narrative here, the long-running rivalry, and the match they had on Raw. I think maybe not the night after WrestleMania, maybe a couple weeks later. It was Edge and Benoit. And Benoit won by the skin of his teeth. He rolled up Edge, who already had his arm injured, Benoit that is, and Edge attacked the arm afterwards, kind of injuring Benoit. So it was a great win-win scenario in that Benoit got the victory, yet Edge was the last man standing, no pun intended. Leading us to this matchup, which, like I said before, they just beat the complete shit out of each other, going all out. I think with a ladder too, they were going crazy in this contest. I can't remember the exact spots, but I just do remember I think Edge, when Benoit did a suicide dive through the ropes, or a tope or whatever it's called. I apologize, I don't know the exact names of each move. I'm much like Michael Cole on Raw, I guess. But Benoit jumps through the ropes and Edge hits him with a steel chair out of nowhere and a brutal shot. And of course, this was back, still in the time where they were connecting with the headshots. Which was not smart in most cases, not always necessary, but, there's nothing you could do 10 years later. But that was the 6th spot, Edge and Benoit, having a great matchup, a lot of awesome chemistry. And the best part about it was that Edge, coming off his big Money in the Bank victory at WrestleMania, was being built strong. They finished up his feud with Benoit, and I was thinking while watching this that Edge, and I'm gonna write an article about this at some point too, but I think Edge had to be, if not up there, at least in the top 3, if not number 1, best Mr. Money in the Banks of all time. And when I say that, I mean, people who were deserving and were built up properly in the time they had that briefcase. Because if you look at that 10-month tenure, that 10-month period in which Edge held that contract in the briefcase, he was winning almost all of his matches, all of his feuds. He was one of the best heels on the goddamn roster. He developed his character into something that could become, that would be WWE champion worthy. And the cash in itself was great. The reign, not so much. It only lasted like 3 weeks, unfortunately. But the match, Edge, at the time period in which he held that briefcase was absolutely awesome. You had this feud with Benoit before feuding with Kane, and the whole Matt Hardy thing, one of the best angles they could have done in '05, kind of blurring the lines between reality and storyline. The feuds that he had with Shawn Michaels and all these other guys, leading a Ric Flair for the Intercontinental Championship in late '05, early 2006 before he cashed in the briefcase. So Edge was built so strongly, because nowadays, far too often do you see guys get jobbed out every single week. Like when Miz was Mr. Money in the Bank, he lost the U.S. title. He never defended the belt. He lost a couple times to Daniel Bryan. I'm trying to think. Damian Sandow, although he did not cash in successfully. Or Ziggler is another guy who was built pretty strongly as Mr. Money in the Bank. But, very, very often do you have guys that lose far too constantly when they're holding that briefcase. And I'm glad that's not, that wasn't the case with Edge and most recently Seth Rollins. I mean, he lost sometimes, but for the most part, though, he was built pretty strongly. So up next, Kane versus Viscera on the show, or Viscera, excuse me. I always mispronounce his name. But kind of the first low point of the show, so to speak. It was not a good match, as good of a match as you could expect from Kane and Viscera. Not a terrible match, but the story they were trying to tell here was that Lita was in the corner of Kane, who was getting the "You screwed Matt," I think, chance. Then Edge was also getting the "We want Matt" or "You screwed Matt" chance, which they would eventually, like I said before, incorporate into the storylines a couple months later. Which was kind of funny to see them, I hear the chants on this show. But the story with this match between Kane and Viscera was that Lita was in the corner of Kane. She was his wife, fiance, lover, whatever the hell it was at that time. And then Trish Stratus was in the corner of Viscera. And originally at WrestleMania 21, it was supposed to be Trish versus Lita. And then Lita got hurt, so she managed Christy Hemme in that disaster of a matchup, so I don't blame them for not doing a rematch at Backlash. But and this was probably better, although it was not the greatest match. I like this approach a little bit more, with Viscera kind of serving as the hitman for Trish, and she wanted him to take out Kane, and then subsequently Lita, which would not come to be. Kane would beat Viscera. Then Trish, after the matchup, was just saying to Viscera, even if you did win, I would have never let you sleep with me, whatever. And then Viscera just, I think, planted her with something and then splashed her. This was before I think it might have been before he was doing the whole humping gimmick, which would have been hilarious to see, but he did not do that. He just did a giant-ass splash. And if you know Big Daddy V and how big he was, that's got to hurt like a son of a bitch. So, and I think Trish was legitimately injured, not from this spot, but before this. Maybe that's why they didn't have her wrestle on this show. But still, though, she would get injured for about 4 or 5 months. And I tweeted this while watching the show, but I don't know why in the fuck they would have Trish as women's champion for as long as she was. She held that title she held it for over a year, but, she got injured in April and didn't come back until September or October. So that's 4 or 5, 6 months right there. And then they didn't strip her of the title. They just acted as if anything, nothing happened. So, I posed that question on Twitter. Some people said they didn't really have anyone else to give that belt to, which makes sense. But I mean, I don't know. You could at the very least given it to Victoria or something like that, to kind of make up for the time that Trish was out with the injury. But I digress. I just thought that was a little bit weird. They didn't have a women's champion for like 5 or 6 months in which she was not featured or mentioned or whatever. A month, I get it. 2 months, kind of stretching a little bit when you're a champion, but 6 months, that's just nuts. So up next, tag team action. Hulk Hogan and Shawn Michaels taking on Muhammad Hassan and Daivari. I'm not going to go into the huge Muhammad Hassan rant like I've talked about before, how, the huge role that this guy was on, how much heat he was getting in 2005, and how great of a world champion he would have been. But then WWE fucked him over. I know it wasn't his fault, the whole timing of the London bombings thing. I went in depth with it with my Great American Bash '05 review, if you want to go check out that one from last summer. But in this period of time, though, they were building him up very, very strongly and pairing him in the ring with two legends in Shawn Michaels and most notably Hulk Hogan was a great idea. I mean, he got one over on Shawn Michaels on more than one occasion on Raw, only to enlist the help of Hulk Hogan. So that led us to this tag team matchup. From an in-ring standpoint, was it a great match? No, of course not. I mean, it had Hogan involved, and Shawn Michaels did most of the work for his team. But, from an in-ring standpoint, it was really cool to see Hogan and Michaels tag teaming with each other. So that alone was worth the spectacle, like I said, with Rock and Goldberg. Was it the best, most well-wrestled matchup ever? Absolutely not. But, I mean, from an entertainment standpoint, it was entertaining as all hell. The crowd ate it all up, much like Hogan was back in, like, '02. In that, he was fucking over when he came back, and that was the case here when he had, those one more match chants at the Hall of Fame, and he came back for this one more match. He would come back for a couple more matches after this for the summer of '05 to kind of plant the seeds for his feud with Shawn Michaels going into SummerSlam. But this matchup right here, I thought, was very enjoyable. I thought him and Shawn Michaels were a great tag team. The mannerisms, Michaels, mocking his mannerisms and whatever, with the hand of the year and stuff like that, I thought was great. And Muhammad Hassan was not beaten here. It was Daivari who took the pinfall. So, like I said before, just being in the ring with those two legends was enough of a rub for him to get over, and he was not the one pinned, so he had his undefeated streak still intact. So I thought that was very greatly booked. I mean, it was predictable, but I mean, from an entertainment standpoint, and it made sense. I mean, if it's predictable, but it makes sense, I mean, you can't really complain. So I thought that was really good, very enjoyable. Hogan and Michaels tag teaming, like I said before, planting the seeds and alluding to, foreshadowing a future match between the two at SummerSlam. So a lot of good stuff there. And then we get to the main event between Batista and Triple H for the World Heavyweight Championship. The only one of the trilogy of matches that these two had, of the three matches that they had, I had not seen. I had seen the WrestleMania 21 match before multiple times, same thing with the Hell in a Cell match multiple times. I enjoyed both bouts. Now, I thought this was the lesser of those three matches. Not to say it was bad, because like I said, I thought, the other two matches were very good to great, especially in the case of the Hell in a Cell one, which I'll hopefully be able to review at some point. I thought Vengeance '05 was a great show, especially that main event. I really want to watch it, hopefully, at some point. But, this main event, though, I thought was really solid. Both guys told a good story. The story going into it was a bit weird. I mean, I guess it was Triple H trying to hit the pedigree, and they were saying that if he hits the pedigree, it's all over, even though he hit one pedigree on him at WrestleMania and he kicked out. So it felt like it was lacking story between Batista and Triple H, and that, that the story of him trying to hit the pedigree, it was weird. I don't know. Maybe they just kind of ran out of content to work off of. But then they would go back to the feud about a month later at, like I said, at Vengeance, and that it wasn't about the pedigree at all. It was about two guys having a very personal rivalry, over the World Heavyweight Championship. So I thought the match itself was solid, not a great match, but for what it was, I always thought Batista and Triple H worked well together. Like I said before, I didn't think it was a mat classic. That's, none of the matches they had were just that. They were no Michaels versus Bret Hart at WrestleMania 12, but what they did succeed in was telling a good story. With Ric Flair in the corner of Triple H, Batista as the valiant, up-and-coming underdog, in a way, against Triple H. He wasn't really an underdog, but against Triple H he was. And then Triple H as the seasoned vet trying to put over the young guys. It was great. I really enjoyed it, and I thought the stories they told in all three of their matches were good. Like I said, this was the lesser of the three, but still a solid match. They weren't given much time, only about 15, 16 minutes. Edge and Benoit went longer. But I still thought it was a good match, though, and Batista came out victorious cleanly to retain the World Heavyweight Championship. And like I said, this would not be the end of the rivalry between these two. They would go on to feud going into the 2005 Vengeance pay-per-view in June inside Hell in a Cell, which I hopefully, like I said before, will hopefully be able to review at some point, because I thought that was a great match. Always love watching it back on Batista's DVD. But that was Backlash 2005 on the whole. Once again, 2 thumbs up from yours truly. I don't know what it is. I'm a huge mark from the year of '05 in wrestling. I mean, I like the years '02, '05, '08, and 2011. And it's always 3-year intervals for me. I don't know why, but I love those 3 years since the start of the millennium. '02, '05, '08, and 2011. And to an extent, 2014. But those 4 years especially. And I thought, this was another great example of how '05 was so awesome in building up new stars and guys like Shelton Benjamin to an extent, which you don't normally think of when you think of, building up stars in 2005. But, they were building Benjamin pretty strongly, as well as Edge and Batista, Muhammad Hassan for a little while anyway. And, on the whole, though, I thought, the show was very enjoyable. We had a new World Tag Team Champions crowned, a great opener in Benjamin versus Jericho, Edge and Benoit having the match of the night hands down. Keenan Viscera, Viscera, I always mispronounce his name. And, for what it was, fine. And it also wrote Trish Stratus out of storylines and off TV for the foreseeable future. It was also great seeing Hulk Hogan back in action, although his in-ring time was limited. That's exactly the way it should have been, with Shawn Michaels doing most of the work for his team, but good stuff there. And as I said, a very solid main event. So absolutely, I would suggest that you go out of your way to watch Backlash 2005 on the WWE Network. A great show on the whole that I very much look forward to, watching all the other ones, '06, '07, '08, and '09, which, like I said before, is already up here on the channel, my thoughts on the show. But I am going to watch it regardless again before the 6-year anniversary or whatever it is. So that's Backlash 2005. I'll be back on Sunday tomorrow with my review of Backlash 2006. And until then, guys, stay safe, be well, and I'll catch you guys on Sunday.